In 612 BC, Nineveh was the center of the world. It was a city of gold and iron, protected by walls so massive they were thought to be eternal. The Assyrians who lived here had spent 3 centuries building an empire of fear, a machine of war that no one on earth could stop. But tonight, the world's first superpower is about to be erased from history. It has been raining upstream for 3 days, and the river is swollen and dark and moving with an urgency that the sentries on the walls of Nineveh have been watching all evening. Water like this is not unusual. The Tigris has flooded before. The walls of Nineveh were built for exactly this kind of night. But there is something else tonight. Something the sentries can hear, but not yet see. Beyond the walls, beyond the floodplain. In the darkness where the Babylonian and Median armies have been camped for 3 months, something is moving. Inside the palace, King Sin-shar-ishkun is still awake. He has not slept properly in weeks. The largest coalition ever assembled against Assyria stands at his gates, and the walls that his ancestors built to be impenetrable are about to face a test that no one inside this city has yet understood. This is the story of the 90 days that turned the world's greatest city into a tomb of ash, a collapse so absolute that Nineveh would remain hidden under the sand for 2,000 years. How did an empire this evil and this powerful vanish in a single summer? In our previous video, if you could remember, we already talked about who the Assyrians were and why they were the empire of evil. The city had been rebuilt by the Assyrian king Sennacherib in the 7th century BC into something that had no equal anywhere on earth. He described it himself, immodestly but not inaccurately, as the city without rival. Its walls stretched for 12 kilometers around the city perimeter. Inside those walls, a population of perhaps 100,000 people lived in a density and sophistication that would not be matched in the Western world for another 1,000 years. The markets of Nineveh smelled like cumin and river mud, and the specific sharp scent of fresh-cut cedar, because Sennacherib had imported cedar from Lebanon to build his palace, and the smell of it had never quite left the city's air. Merchants here traded goods from Egypt, from Persia, from the Caucasus. The city sat at the intersection of every major trade route in the ancient Near East, and it grew fat and powerful on the tariffs and the tribute that passed through it. And above the markets, dominating everything, the palace. Sennacherib's palace, which he called the Palace Without Rival, a title he gave everything he built, contained more than 80 rooms, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with carved relief panels depicting Assyrian military victories in explicit and carefully recorded detail. This was not decoration. This was a deliberate political statement, carved in stone, designed to be read by every foreign dignitary who entered the palace. You are inside the palace of the people who did these things. Choose your next words carefully. The Assyrian Empire at its peak stretched from Egypt in the west to the Iranian plateau in the east, from the Mediterranean coast to the Persian Gulf. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen, governed by a military and administrative machine of ruthless efficiency that had been refined over 3 centuries of continuous expansion. And that machine was built on something very specific, not just military strength, fear. The Assyrians had understood something about power that most empires before them had only partially grasped. If you make the cost of resistance appear catastrophic enough, most of your enemies will choose not to resist. Every atrocity they committed was recorded and broadcast specifically to make the next city's calculation simpler. the flayed kings on the gates, the pyramids of severed heads, the deportations of entire populations. These were not the side effects of conquest, they were the strategy. And for 300 years, the strategy worked. But there is something the Assyrians did not fully reckon with. Every city that surrendered to that strategy did not simply accept their fate. They remembered it. They told their children about it. They waited. The alliance that destroyed Nineveh did not form because of military strategy. It formed because of rage. And that rage had been accumulating for generations. In the south, the city of Babylon had a specific grievance. Sennacherib, the great builder of Nineveh, had destroyed Babylon in 689 BC, not simply conquered it, but deliberately and systematically erased it. He had diverted the Euphrates River over the ruins. He had claimed to have removed the very statue of the Babylonian god Marduk to Nineveh, an act that was, in the religious framework of the ancient Near East, the equivalent of murdering the city's soul. Babylon had been rebuilt by Sennacherib's successor, but the memory of its destruction had never left. In 626 BC, a man named Nabopolassar seized power in Babylon. He was a Chaldean from one of the semi-nomadic tribes of southern Mesopotamia that the Assyrians had been fighting and suppressing for generations. He was not a great general, not yet. He was something more dangerous, a man with an extremely clear sense of what he wanted and the patience to build toward it carefully. Nabopolassar spent his first years consolidating power in Babylonia, fighting off Assyrian counterattacks, building alliances, and learning the specific weaknesses of the empire he intended to destroy. He was methodical in a way that the Assyrians, accustomed to overwhelming force, had difficulty countering. From the northeast came the second element of the coalition. The Medes were a people from the Iranian plateau, speakers of an early Iranian language, who had been building a kingdom in the mountains east of Assyria for decades. Their king, Cyaxares, had his own reasons to hate the Assyrians. The Medes had been raided, taxed, and intermittently subjugated by Assyrian military expeditions for generations. He had something else too, an army that had recently been modernized through contact with the nomadic Scythians, and a grudge that was specifically personal. In 614 BC, the Medes struck first. They attacked Assur, the ancient religious capital of the Assyrian Empire, the city whose name the Assyrians had given to their god, and their entire identity. When Assur fell, Nabopolassar arrived with his Babylonian forces to view the ruins. The two kings met in person for the first time. They concluded a treaty, sealed by a royal marriage between their families. The coalition was now formal. Babylon in the south, Media in the northeast, and between them, the most powerful city the ancient world had ever produced. Back in Nineveh, King Sin-shar-ishkun was not unaware of what was coming. He had intelligence networks. He had received reports. He had made decisions, military deployments, appeals to allies, preparations for a siege. What he did not have was time. The siege began in the summer of 612 BC. The combined Babylonian and Median forces surrounded Nineveh on multiple sides, cutting off the roads, controlling the river traffic, isolating the city from any possibility of resupply or reinforcement. This was standard siege doctrine, and the Assyrians had written most of it themselves. They knew exactly what was happening, and they knew their walls were supposed to make it irrelevant. The walls of Nineveh were extraordinary military engineering, 15 meters high in their defended sections, wide enough, as we have said, for 2 chariots to pass each other on the ramparts, equipped with towers at regular intervals, with archer positions, with defensive mechanisms that the Assyrians had refined over centuries of siege warfare experience. An attacking force attempting to storm those walls directly was asking to be destroyed. The coalition commanders knew this. They were not planning a direct assault. They were planning something more patient. For 3 months, the siege held. The citizens of Nineveh watched from the walls as the enemy camp grew more organized, more permanent, more confident. Supplies inside the city were consumed. The psychological pressure of watching an army that was not attacking, that was simply waiting, created its own specific kind of dread. Then the rains came. The Tigris upstream had been receiving heavy rainfall for days. The river level was rising, and someone in the coalition command, the ancient sources are not precise about exactly who or how, had identified something that the Assyrians had known about and never properly fixed. One section of Nineveh's defensive perimeter ran along the Tigris itself. The river was, in normal conditions, part of the city's defense. But the specific construction, where the walls met the riverbank, had a weakness. If the water rose high enough, if the current became forceful enough, the foundations of that section could be undermined. The coalition forces used the flood. Exactly how is still debated by historians. The ancient sources, including the Babylonian Chronicle, which is our most direct contemporary account, describe the river rising and a portion of the city's defenses collapsing. Whether the coalition actively channeled floodwater against the walls or simply exploited the natural flooding to attack at the moment of structural weakness, the result was the same. The impenetrable walls of Nineveh broke. What followed was fast, and it was total. Once a breach existed in those walls, the psychological advantage that had held the city together for 90 days collapsed with them. The defenders, already depleted and exhausted, faced an enemy entering from multiple directions. The organization that the Assyrian military machine was famous for, the disciplined professional force that had terrorized the ancient world for 3 centuries, could not function in the chaos of a city being breached in multiple places simultaneously. King Sin-shar-ishkun died in the fall of the city. The ancient sources suggest he set fire to the palace himself rather than be taken alive. The ultimate Assyrian gesture, choosing the manner of your own ending rather than submitting to an enemy's judgment. The city burned for days. Nineveh did not simply fall. It was erased. The coalition forces did not occupy and govern the city the way the Assyrians had occupied and governed the cities they conquered. They dismantled it. They stripped its palaces of anything valuable, its storehouses of anything useful, and then they left. The administrative apparatus of the Assyrian Empire, the governors, the record-keepers, the bureaucrats who had kept this vast machine running, had nowhere to go and no authority to exercise. Within a generation, Nineveh was a ruin inhabited by almost no one. And here is the detail that should genuinely stop you. Nineveh vanished from human memory almost completely. The Hebrew Bible refers to Nineveh in the book of Nahum with barely contained celebration at its destruction. 3 chapters of poetry that amount to one of the most sustained expressions of joy at an enemy's downfall in all of ancient literature. But by the time the Greek historian Xenophon marched his army past the site of Nineveh in 401 BC, less than 250 years after its fall, he did not know what city he was passing. He recorded that there were large ruins there, but had no idea of their significance or origin. The greatest city the ancient world had produced had become, within 2.5 centuries, an unidentified mound of earth. It stayed that way for 2,000 years. It was not until the 1840s that British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard began excavating the mounds near the modern city of Mosul in Iraq and realized what he was standing on. The palace reliefs that had lined Sennacherib's rooms, the carved stone records of Assyrian military campaigns that had been designed to intimidate foreign visitors, had been buried under the rubble for 2 millennia. Layard shipped many of them to the British Museum, where they remain today. There is something almost unbearably ironic about that image. The carvings that Sennacherib designed to make the powerful afraid are now a tourist attraction. The empire that called itself the masters of the world is now a museum exhibit. The city that seemed immortal in 612 BC is now a collection of mounds outside Mosul. But here is the thing. The Assyrians were not simply erased. They were absorbed. The administrative systems they developed, the postal networks, the road systems, the model of a centralized multi-ethnic empire held together by bureaucracy and force, were inherited by every empire that came after them. The Babylonians who destroyed Nineveh built on Assyrian foundations. The Persians who displaced the Babylonians built on those. The administrative logic of Assyria flows, in a direct and traceable line, through Persian, Greek, Roman, and Byzantine governance. The most ruthless empire in the ancient world was also, in the most structural sense, the model that everyone who came after them quietly used. The Tigris is still loud tonight. It is the same river that undermined the walls in 612 BC. The same river that the sentries watched on Nineveh's last night. It does not remember what happened. It simply moves, the way it has always moved, past the place where the greatest city in the world used to stand. No empire is permanent, not even the ones that were certain they would be, especially not those. Nineveh fell to the Babylonians, but what happened to Babylon? The empire that destroyed the greatest city in the ancient world lasted less than a century before it too was conquered by Cyrus the Great of Persia, on a night when the king was throwing a banquet and the river gates were left unguarded. That story is already on this channel. Click here to watch the fall of Babylon and see if you can spot the pattern.